The United States needs a new war, and the one between Russia and Ukraine is going to be it.
The Russian military has begun a brutal assault on the people of Ukraine. Without provocation, without justification, without necessity, this is a premeditated attack.
As you may have heard, there is a lot of stuff going on in Europe right now. Just to name a few: war, inflation, energy crisis, and other commodity and food shortages, and I could continue. With Russia's invasion of Ukraine, a lot of problems got uncovered with the world's dependence on Russian and Ukrainian commodities, and it is the most painful for the nearby European countries. So who comes to help? Yes, of course, good old Uncle Sam. But don't jump so far ahead just yet. The slowing economical growth of the US is well known for the last few years, and it all started with losing relevance against China and other rapidly developing countries like India, Japan, Germany, or let's say most of Western Europe. US's trade has weakened, most manufacturing is still abroad, and since Obama left 5 years ago, US has one of the strongest country between the red and blue states in decades. The ever-changing foreign policies and pumping trillions of tax dollars into wars that cannot be won is not helping either. For most of Europe, the past few decades resulted a calm and stable environment for massive economic growth and generally livable conditions. But this is about to change, and the US will profit on it. To have a little context here, Europe's cheap Russian commodity-based economy is at a downfall right now. The war has amplified already existing economic problems such as rising energy prices and supply chain disruption, which were induced by COVID in the first place. The main factor is the surge in energy, fertilizer, and wheat prices, which is driving inflation to record highs and putting a strain on European businesses and households. If this was not enough, there is a war next door, costing tens of thousands of lives from both sides and starting the largest migration crisis, with millions of people fleeing Ukraine and seeking a safe place to continue their lives, which will never be the same again.
We know that if we don't change course, we will have hundreds of millions of people falling back into poverty. We have tens of millions probably dying, possibly of hunger. So this is a misery, and we have to address it.
Moscow's original plan, based on what we know as of right now, was to quickly annex Ukraine in this special operation of Putin's. As we know, that did not go as planned. Ukraine's unexpectedly strong and effective resistance even surprised Putin. Also, most of the world's strong condemnation about sanctions against Russia is unmatched.
The sanctions against the Central Bank of Russia, which were enacted on Monday morning, are probably the single largest sanctions action in modern history.
Europe's economic constraints are quite extensive and are continuing day by day, with even more further-reaching bans of Russian goods and commodities. Just to name a few of these: travel bans, asset freezes for close to the government parties and individuals, export of precious metals, wood, steel, and iron, also food and liquor, and even wheat, import of goods from EU like tech, dual-use goods, luxury products, and Russia even got locked out of the SWIFT banking system, making it really complicated to send and receive money from abroad. Oh, and almost forgot to mention that it has also banned export oil and petroleum products from Russia, of which Europe's economy is based on. And now you can all take a guess who is profiting from this. Yes, the US, of course they are. And now, let's talk war.
A number of U.S. troops are stationed there, standing by to respond to even the slightest aggression toward NATO allies.
Just today, President Biden announcing sanctions on the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline and the corporations behind its construction.
So what does this war mean for the U.S.? In short, money. Money and influence. Once again, US is coming to save you, but of course it has a cost. If there is a war happening somewhere, the US generally feels like they have to take part in some form, take a side and maybe step in. This happened already many times, and it is happening again with Ukraine. Stepping in as of now is not a real option since Putin's mental health and ability to judge is not at its best, so any direct contact between the US and Russia may result in the deployment of mass destruction weaponry, which is not really preferred by anyone. The US has to walk on a wire with taking part in this war, because any wrong statement can induce a new world war. So although no direct contact, yet the US, and the EU too, is basically in war with Russia. The US is loaning, sending aid, sending weapons, taking part in the sanctions and sharing intel, so generally making it harder for Putin and his troops to be successful with their war. Also, the US has around 750 military bases overseas, most of them scattered around Europe and the North Pacific, so basically most of them are facing Russia and China. More on that later. The sheer military presence of this huge country itself keeps less powerful countries in order because they know that once a war is forming, Uncle Sam is going to show up and find some reason to intervene, and it surely can if it wants with this much firepower under the belt. So why exactly the US needs this war? There are 4 main groups of reasons. Let's see. First, if the cheap Russian natural gas is not an option anymore, then Europe has to fulfill its energy needs from another source, which can of course be the US. This is also the case with oil and wheat. In fact, Joe Biden already made a deal with EU countries' leaders to help with their gas and oil needs. In March, there were basically few to none restrictions and bans on Russian energy back then, but the US was already working on deals to replace Russian gas with US gas, which is by costs about 7 times more for the EU. Smart. By the way, they have already surpassed the quantity they promised by a huge margin. Turns out the US was right about the length and seriousness of this war because as it looks like now it won't end anytime soon. Also, fall and chilly weather is coming in a month or so most of the EU countries are filling their reserves and hoping it will last. Second, influence and decision-making of Europe. As I said in the previous reason, it didn't take long for the US to strengthen its bonds with Europe. They already signed one of the largest natural gas export contracts in history at a record high price for 20 years. But influence is not just about energy, it is also about special deals and trades, taxes, and getting new allies. Third, now the US has a legitimate reason to strengthen its military presence around Europe, and in fact, they already did, and they did it extremely fast and astoundingly efficient. Approximately 40,000 US troops have been transferred to European bases, making the total number of active troops around 100,000. Also, the US sent more than $5.3 billion of aid, including hundreds of tanks, 1,400 anti-aircraft missiles, 30,000 anti-armor missiles, 7,000 firearms, and 50 million rounds. How could they deal with such a complicated logistical issue so fast? They were prepared for this and had plans to execute already. Fourth, with all the money flowing to the US from Europe, they can keep up their economic growth unlike the rest of the world in this situation. Arms and defense is an extraordinarily big business in the US, and the money will keep coming even after the current situation is solved because most of the countries are already budgeting huge defense developments for next year and so on. Amongst others, this induced that the dollar is stronger now than any time in the past 2 decades. In July, $1 was worth exactly €1, the first time since 2002. This also shows US citizens that the new leadership of their country is strong and is doing what's best. And the US anti-Russian propaganda is going on for decades, both in politics and media, so these events could show very well that the US is still in the lead. There is nothing to fear from, strengthening further Biden's administration and acceptance rate.
Is to pit one of us against the other through class warfare, race hatred, or religious intolerance. You know that person seeks to rob us of our freedom and destroy our very lives.
What is next? Most probably the US will not intervene directly or send troops to the field because nobody wants a nuclear war, which would be the consequence of this. Geopolitical expert Samuel Romani say it's outside the realm of possibility right now that there's going to be a nuclear war or World War III that really spills over that far beyond Ukraine's borders.
Russia plans to hold strategic military exercises in the east of the country starting next month, the Defense Ministry said on Tuesday, thousands of miles from the war in Ukraine. The Defense Ministry said Russia had not canceled any training activities or international cooperation, and the exercises would be supplied with all necessary personnel, weapons, and equipment. Whether and on what scale China takes part this year will provide significant clues to the state of bilateral relations, as Putin attempts to court Beijing at a time of heightened confrontation between Russia and the West.
The previous Vostok drills in 2018 took place on a massive scale with nearly 300,000 troops reported to be involved, including for the first time from the Chinese army. Currently, no one knows what this could mean and what could be the real goal with this military exercise, but let's just hope this is not a main rehearsal with the Chinese army before they join forces. All the world can do for now is staying tuned and prepared. Extending this war could very well end in Ukraine losing its sovereignty or regions of the country, but there is no one to predict when and how will this end. Thank you for watching. I hope I summed it up for you. If you enjoyed, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe. It really helps a lot.